Welcome to Triptych.
Three friends having a chat
about three artistic masterpieces,
making connections for modern life. Here we are at episode 5. It's great to be back together, and I'm going to go straight in there. Our opening gambit question. What is the masterpiece that you are most jealous of, that you most wish you created yourself?
There's a masterpiece that ideally I would have loved to have done myself, which is the Sibelius Violin Concerto. I mean, it's just the most like moody, disturbing, virtuosic piece, but it feels like that would never ever...
Because those things describe you.
Yes. Moody, virtuosic. Yeah, I mean, yes, why not? Okay. Let's go for it. But it feels like never in any alternate universe would I create that. So I guess really I'd say I really wish something I had made, which I feel like I could have made had I got there first, is a little graphic novel called The Trouble with Women by Jackie Fleming, and it's a satirical piece, and it's very, very funny. It discusses whether women can be geniuses or whether our arms are too short, and if the size of our brains impedes our thoughts, so we're actually better suited to soft furnishings and disappointment. And it's such a bit
like T-Rex then. T-Rex has got short arms.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm like, this is my kind of humor.
You did not write this? That's what you're saying? Yeah. You did not do this? Because it sounds like you.
I know, and I was reading it. I know. And so I was like, dang it, why didn't I do that? So, yeah. So that's kind of my answer in the real world.
That's revealing. Joel,
yeah.
What about you?
Well, yeah, it is a tantalizing question. I mean, I think, of course, because my main art form was music and songwriting, my first thought was, which one of the many songs that I really admire would I have want to have written? But the more I thought about it, I thought of a painting. There's a painting in the lobby of one of the main hotels in Kingston. And it's a painting of like the hills above Kingston. And it's so detailed and just it's realism, but I mean it feels like the brushstrokes are perfect. They get the foliage perfect. And it's this large format painting. And I'm like, yeah, if I could paint more than, for GCE O levels type things as I did, I would want to have done that because I think it's
so you're going to have to get us a picture of that then, aren't you? Because
I think I have a picture somewhere. And here's the funny thing. I can't even find out the artist because it's not signed. I asked one of the receptionists in the lobby, do you know who did that? And they were like, no. Kind of like what? You think that's my job to know anything about the art in this place? It's like, do you need a room? Kind of reply.
Dude, if you find out that it's a piece of AI generated art, you're going to be gutted.
I would be, but thankfully, it's been there since before we were doing that sort of thing. So
hopefully one of the Triptych listeners will be able to track it down for us and send us the results.
Well, yeah, if anybody can figure out who did that, because I'd be looking to buy art from that artist.
For me, I think it would be a novel, probably by Graham Greene. There are a bunch of his novels that I just love. Some of them are exceedingly funny, but I think it's one of his serious ones that just gets me right between the eyeballs and on the heartstrings, if you can do that simultaneously. And that is his novel, The Power and the Glory, about the anonymous whiskey priest in kind of revolutionary Mexico between the First and Second World War, when several states had gone or were going communist. And he is the last priest on the run in his state. There are just some magical things about the book. There is a 5 or 6 page scene in a prison cell. And I think I'm right in saying that Greene felt that those 5 pages were the best pages he ever wrote. And they made me cry the first time I read them. And since reading them and going back to them, the effect is similar. I just think it's an extraordinary book. And I aspire to such things, but I'm a minnow in his presence. But there you go.
Right then, gang, my amazing masterpiece, I think, this time is a film called Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. This is a film that came out in 2004. And I feel like I should say that for me, personally, 2004 was a very turbulent year romantically for me. I'd broken up with like a long-term boyfriend, fallen in love, had my heart absolutely shattered, and then went on to meet my husband. And this film came out 2004. I saw it then, and it resonated so strongly, the themes of love and separation and grief, that I've just been in love with this film ever since.
This is a hoax, right? I assure you no. Is there any risk of brain damage? It's on a par with a night of heavy drinking. Nothing you'll miss.
So basically, it is a surrealist science fiction romantic drama. It's non-linear in its narrative, so things in the film don't happen chronologically. It's kind of hard to piece it together at first when you're first watching it. It starts to slot into place. It was directed by the French director Michel Gondry, and he's really known for his distinct visual style. He really likes using set pieces and camera tricks. He doesn't like using CGI at all. So it's always, the things you see are always kind of done physically. And he actually demands quite a lot from his actors. The cast in it, as the kids would say, is stacked. So it's got Jim Carrey. It's got Jim Carrey playing a completely straight role. He is not a funny man in it. Kate Winslet as the kind of manic pixie dream girl trope. Tom Wilkinson, Kirsten Dunst, Elijah Wood, Mark Ruffalo is amazing. So the essential plot of the film is that this kind of shy, introverted, straight man Joel, played by Jim Carrey, he finds that after the end of his relationship with Clementine, who is Kate Winslet, this turbulent kind of indie girl, she has decided to have a procedure done where all the memories of their relationship have been erased. So she literally doesn't recognize him. And in his absolute anger and anguish about this, he decides also, kind of almost as payback, to undergo this procedure too. So he's put to sleep, and then we see the technicians kind of trawling through the memories in his brain to erase them one by one, the memories of her. And so we kind of join Joel in this kind of dreamlike state as he's going through these memories, and they're slowly getting erased. And so you first see the end of their relationship. And of course, it's really turbulent. They're saying cruel things to each other. It's angry, it's bitter. But the further back you go in the memories, you actually start to see this genuine love that they had for each other, the tenderness and the kind of safety they had. And Joel, within his mind, starts to fully panic, suddenly realizing, I'm not just getting rid of the bad memories, I'm getting rid of the most beautiful memories. And so in his mind, he kind of realizes he can't stop this procedure from happening, but he's desperate to hold on to maybe even just one beautiful memory. So he's trying to hide out in his memory. So that's kind of the plot of it. It's beautiful, and I think really shows how memory shapes us and makes us who we are. So what did you guys make of it? Joel, what did you reckon?
I remember watching it years ago, and it stayed in my mind as one of the weirdest films I had watched. I mean, first of all, it's fascinating at that time to see Jim Carrey playing a non-Jim Carrey role, because he had been so typecast by things like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and some of just his zany comedy, that to see him in a role that demanded real dramatic chops and just layers and levels in a character was fascinating. And I thought he was brilliant. So watching it again, I still think it's one of the weirdest films I've ever seen. Yet weirdly affecting. You know, I think they do such a good job of portraying just the carnage of love, where you're drawn to somebody, yet your flaws and their flaws collide. The things it brings out of you, both the beautiful and the ugly. But then also, I mean, just the story that's running alongside their love story and his recollection of their love story of this office that does this procedure. And, you know, I memorable scene was, you know, he goes into the office and there's this woman with all this stuff from her pet. You know, just like you realize, oh, wait, she wants to forget her pet. And you're like, how bizarre, but okay, I get it. Just like, the set, just that idea of how do we deal with loss, and how do we deal with love and loss in our lives, and just the notion that this place can erase memories, and the idea that, oh, we're doing a great service for people, and you realize there's this whole seedy underbelly in all of the relationships in that office, and Elijah Wood is despicable. He's brilliant at being despicable as his character. So yeah, I really enjoyed watching it again. It was as bizarre and mind-bending as the first time.
Excellent. That's what I like to hear. How about you, Mark?
I had not seen it before. I can't quite believe that I hadn't.
Really?
Yeah, it's weird.
Wow.
I
know, I'm shocked.
I am quite shocked too. I feel very disappointed with myself. But but obviously I'd been aware of it and had seen clips and had a general idea. I have to say I was blown away by it, and I can see what all the fuss was about. So I quite enjoyed the fact that I had to be fully immersed this time round. I found it incredibly poignant. And Sophie, you and I've chatted a bit recently about Severance, and obviously that makes a lot more sense now, having seen this movie, because there are clear influences on the TV show from this and other places. I found the whole question of memory and identity and suffering such a really interesting kind of sort of complex web, really. The fact that you can't really have your cake and eat it. If you're going to erase the memories, as you were saying, Sophie, you erase the beautiful and happy. And so then it forces you to think, well, actually, maybe the negative needs to be held on to so that you can hold on to the happy, and that that they play off each other, that actually both are important to what it means to be human in a way. So it's very provocative in that way. It's really got me thinking. I've had it in my mind, sort of going around my mind since watching it a few weeks ago, and I'm really glad I did. I was really blown away. Maybe I actually just really like the bizarre stuff. Maybe, Joel, you probably think I am more bizarre than you are, but I don't know.
We could have a contest there. I think we could go some laps and see.
I mean, Mark, while you were watching it, you did message me and said, are you Clementine? Because of the and the basic, bizarre behaviour.
That was only about 10 minutes in, to be fair.
And then, at which I had to admit, I actually did take a picture of Clementine to my hairdressers once and went, "This, please."
So it was a couple of weeks ago then, presumably.
It's been in the last couple of years, at least. But I agree with the idea that you can't get rid of the good the bad memories without sacrificing the good. And isn't that what shapes us? We can't become the people that we're becoming without the whole thing to inform it. I wouldn't be the person I am now without the kind of heartbreak and the grief that gives me, hopefully, the wisdom at the end of it.
Oh, is that what you call it?
Yes.
So you must have been in 2005. You were mad and wise.
Oh, absolutely. I was so wise by that point. Which, that was the year I got married. So my husband would be like, "Really?" But I also liked the kind of idea that memory also protects us. Like with some of the subplots going on, especially the Kirsten Dunst one, where you see, because she's had the procedure and she hasn't realised she's had the procedure, she starts to repeat a very abusive, kind of unhealthy relationship. And she never would have done that had she known that this had already been done. She'd already lived this and it was disastrous. So I was like, that's actually a really interesting point, that memory protects us. It tells us what's been bad and what to avoid in the future.
So in some circumstances, it's like a sort of red light warning, keep away. But in other circumstances, particularly between Joel and Clem, because near the end, they listen to the tapes they record as to why they want to do this procedure. And it's excruciating because they hear themselves saying the very things about the other. But the thing that struck me about that is that they both decide not to abort, but that, okay, they've said all these things. These are realities. We're going to have to figure out a way to navigate this. And there's a a maturity of relationship there, because actually, if you're just living rose tinted and it's all perfect and happy, then it's just gonna crash and burn. But if you found a way to navigate the flaws and the irritants and whatever else it is that brings about those clashes, which every relationship has, then there's hope for you. And I think that's the real, I guess, the learning point for both of them is that actually the other person's flaws are not big enough now to say, don't go there. They're going to try and work through it rather than the way. So that I suppose you've got the contrasting, relationships there, don't you? Between the main two and then Kirsten Dunst and what's his face?
And I think it's almost like in the way the story was told, they get an artificial moment that we don't all get, that allows them to see how ugly I can be when I've been offended and when I want to see the worst in someone else or in a relationship. And then they get to the point where they realize, okay, this is how bad it can get. This is how hard it can feel. And let's do this anyway. And I thought, I think we all have to reach that point without getting to that point, of expressing all of these horrible thoughts necessarily, but realizing, wait, but there's something worth chasing and protecting, and just allowing myself to grow and learn and accommodate in order to experience love.
And that is so non-Hollywood, isn't it? I mean, Hollywood never goes there, or rarely goes there. It always says, "Oh, it's just going to be bliss," or
it's going to be horrible.
Yes,
like Marriage Story, I think it was called a few years ago. Just carnage. So they go one direction or the other. You're right.
I think that's such a beautiful kind of end point that we get to, because it is showing that love isn't this idealized kind of place that you reach and then never leave. Life is ongoing, and there are just struggles, and we say cruel things to each other and we hurt each other, but how like love is about working past that and forgiveness and trying to see how this works and fighting for it. It was really beautiful.
Our next masterpiece is a whole album by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, the album Ghosteen that came out in 2019, so just before COVID. It's actually a double album, and it's an album in which Cave is processing the grief he and his wife felt after the death of their son, Arthur, who was only 15. He died in 2015, But saying that initially makes it sound very dark and doomy and grim. And I think the first thing to say about this album is that the astonishing fact is that this is not dark and doomy. There's something very hopeful and longing about it. It faces the realities of their grief, but it somehow works through it in a really remarkable and even generous way. I think many people have testified to the fact that listening to this album has really helped them in their own grief, whether it's literally from someone having died or some circumstance that has affected them similarly. I was reading one thing that was saying that actually the impact of this album has been a bit like C.S. Lewis's book, A Grief Observed, where just by laying it all out on the table and being very honest and open, people somehow they buy into the particularities of the grief. So it's clearly Nick in his own situation, but somehow that gives it a universality, which is, astonishing. It's a double album. It's not quite two equal parts. I read one place that he described how part one, which is the first album, is like the children, and part two, the second album, which is sort of three longer tracks, is like the parents. I don't quite know what to make of that. You can tell me what you think, you two. But it's a bit odd. But what is interesting musically is that the moment it starts, you're sort of swept up in this weird sort of, whooshy synths and loops and things, and it feels very floaty and weightless. You don't quite know where you are musically. in several songs, actually, until you get into them. And then somehow you can begin to track whether you're sort of up or down, east or west or whatever. And then every now and then a song will come out with a really strong statement of conviction or resolution even, which takes you by surprise, but actually sweeps you up in it. And so often it'll be a chorus with just a phrase repeated, like waiting for you, or I love you, or whatever it is. Sometimes it'll be just the way the musical arrangement just suddenly kicks in. So some critics have noticed that there's hardly any percussion, but every now and then when the percussion comes in, it really changes gear and you just think, there's something very releasing and therapeutic about that. And I guess the last thing I would say, just to point out before we sort of discuss it, is it's absolutely chock-a-block with God talk. There's a lot of spiritual stuff going on, whether it's Jesus explicitly, or there are one or two Buddhist references as well, I think, although I'm less au fait with those, but very much a sort of Christian understanding, perhaps underlying it all, of hope beyond this life. That seems to be underpinning it. And he's got a conviction that his son is calling to him. So the title of the album and one song, Ghosteen, I read that basically is a kind of a fabricated word, ghost, obviously, for somebody who's died. But if you add "een" on the end in the Irish language, it's a kind of way of making it colloquial or affectionate or whatever, like a little ghost or a ghostlet.
Ghosteen dances in my hand, slowly twirling all around, a glowing circle in my hand.
And so there's very much this voice from beyond calling to him, and he's calling back, longing to be reunited. And that fits with, a Christian worldview. There are many other things we could say, but Joel, what was your reaction? Did you know this album before?
Not at all. I had heard of Nick Cave. Actually, there's an Australian blogger, Stephen McAlpine, who I read from time to time, who kind of has referred to Cave and his spiritual journey. So, I kind of name in the background somewhere there. So yeah, again, listening to this was, fascinating. Like, I did struggle with the lack of percussion. I'm West Indian. Percussion is everything. Rhythm is like the base of music for us. We want to know, what's going on. So even as a musician, I'm trying to count with some of these songs, and I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of just kind of playing with tempo. So I think, again, confession, which is not going to sound really high arty at all. When he started, I was like, oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name. Oh goodness, I'm forgetting the name of the person I want to refer to. It will come back soon. So I'll get back to that thought.
Nick Cave?
if it happens Nick? At all.
Nick?
Say again?
No.
William Shatner.
I was like,
yes, that's who I wanted.
Oh no!
No, and I thought this is so bad. But around Christmas, I subjected my family to some William Shatner Christmas carols, which were hilarious.
Yes, because he speaks them, doesn't he?
Yes, because he speaks them. So I'm like, oh no, I'm associating with William Shatner. This is not going to be good. But thankfully, that didn't persist as I listened. I mean, his lyrics are vivid. The imagery is fantastic. Yet there's a simplicity to it. You don't feel like he's trying to be convoluted. You don't feel like he's kind of pandering and trying to create something complicated. But the visual world definitely comes at you and pulls you in. Now, I didn't know the background to the album, which I'm glad I didn't, because I'm now picking up, he's on a journey with somebody. And I'm guessing that's his wife, as he's grieving, or at least that's how it hit me. But yeah, I thought his moving back and forth between faith and doubt was a feature that I picked up, that at times he was just ready to give up and say all there is what we can see. kind of thing. But then you see him reach again for a reality that is beyond what's here. But yeah, it was certainly an experience. I sat there with my headphones listening to it. I was planning to do something else while listening and found that I couldn't do much else. It was an immersive experience. So yeah, I mean, thank you for introducing me. Oh, the last thing I'll say is that, and I think it makes sense in the context of grieving, it's an album that requires patience. He's not giving what he has to give quickly or easily. He's asking you to listen. He's asking you to become a part of the journey. And I thought that was really interesting.
And actually that's important, isn't it? Because in this era of streaming, you don't often get the sense that things are constructed as albums, but this clearly is. And it needs to be listened as a unit, I think. Yeah.
And the way he brought images back, I appreciated that, because I grew up in the age of albums. The only time you'd get individual songs was on the radio. So recognizing that there's such a thing as a well-constructed album that has a story that's through going. So hearing images come back, his image of horses, and he's bringing that back 5 songs later, and some of the phrases that he's been repeating, it's like, oh, wow, yeah, you are stitching something together. And in listening to it once, I'm just beginning to pick up, parts of the whole.
Sophie?
I've been a big fan of Nick Cave for a long, long time. I was listening to this when it came out, and I knew the back story of having lost his teenage son. I do love, as Joel was saying, the way it is constructed together. You have to go on this journey. It is not an easily accessible album. And that's not to say it's convoluted, because it isn't, but it kind of feels like his stream of consciousness at times, that he's kind of putting together his feelings and the pictures in his mind as they're forming. And you completely follow that, but it's not the easiest of listens. But I love how he does this album, not just as an expression of his own grief, but also as a look at maternal grief as well. And I really appreciated that, because I think it'd be very easy for a musician to kind of just disappear into themselves as a way to kind of process such an unimaginable tragedy. But I love the way that he's constantly also watching his wife and how she's experiencing it, and knowing it's a different experience for her, having carried the children. And I really appreciate that, and the way he's fighting for their love and fighting for them, and seeing that they're both, I think it's in the song Fireflies, he references, as he does a couple of times, Jesus lying in his mother's arms. So we've got a mother cradling a dead child. And he talks about,
and that
how
image is
like
repeated
fireflies.
in another song as well. Sorry. Sophie.
It is. It's repeated. No. And he says they're like fireflies trapped by a child. And so he sees him and his wife, they're trapped in this grief of their dead child. And he says, and I am here and you are where you are. And it's just like this sense of separation, that this absolute kind of gulf and chasm, and it's shared grief, but also separate grief. And he does that so beautifully, which I really, really enjoyed. I think one of the most heartbreaking tracks, I mean, I love Bright Horses, that's my favorite, but one of the most heartbreaking tracks, I think, is Ghosteen Speaks. And that is when we're essentially attending the funeral, and we're seeing it from the perspective of his dead son. And you kind of only start to realize that when they have this repeated refrain in just voices kind of almost wailing softly, and it kind of gets more and more, and it feels like it's collective grief and wailing. And then the voice sings, I think they're gathered here for me. And it just absolutely breaks me that I think, he says, I think they're singing for me. I think they're gathered here for me. And then he's trying to say, I'm beside you. Oh my goodness. That breaks me. And the way they use the kind of musical devices to show that collective grief. I feel like literally tearful talking about it. It moves me so much. So, so I can't believe you compared him to William Shatner.
No, I don't think we need to dwell on that, Sophie. I think that's not a helpful comment.
That was an admission.
He was just being honest.
how
He's not
messed
going to be
up
honest now.
my mind is.
No, I appreciate the honesty hugely. I'm just literally making jokes to stop me from crying because I feel so moved.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Oh gosh.
And I think particularly that, the funeral, something about the fact that in the West particularly, we don't really know what to do with death. We don't really have our rituals. We don't have wailing. In Britain, at least, we're all very stiff upper lipped and, sort of shake hands and say, yes, marvelous, lovely service, vicar, all that sort of
lovely
rubbish.
service.
Yes, lovely service. That's what people say to me at the end of a funeral.
Yes.
Unless I've done it badly. But there's something healthier about this. It's just much more out there. And I think that's probably one of the reasons it's made such an impact on people.
Yeah. It does feel like you say, it's like releasing. It feels almost euphoric at times. Because it's like he's releasing these and acknowledging fully the weight of grief and reaching for the other side. And I love the way he does that.
My masterpiece this time is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. It's a couple of, since we've been doing true life confessions on this episode, let me start there. So I had never read this until last year. I read a lot as a teenager and then stopped reading when I got into my 20s. And I'm kind of going through a renaissance now where I'm just like, oh, I'd love to read that. And I was at my mother-in-law's house and helping her just to rearrange some shelves. She had gotten some new shelves, gotten rid of some older ones. And she has this massive collection of literature of all kinds of types, including a lot of African and Caribbean writers. And I saw it and I was like, I've never read that. I've always heard about it. I'd like to read that. Not realizing I was taking from her a signed copy of this book.
Wow.
Which was really cool to realize, as I'm getting into it. I'm like, wait, he signed this. Oh my goodness.
You sure she didn't fake it?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. What's interesting is that in this particular edition, the blurb on the back of the book, and even there's an opening kind of by Ian Serralier. It makes it seem like this book is really going to be about, at its core, what happened when Christian missionaries came into this particular part of Nigeria. And then you read the book and you realize the Christian missionaries don't come in until the second part of the book, which is not even quite a half of the book. But really, the story is about Okonkwo, an Igbo man, and just his story, really his descent. He's a tragic character throughout in some ways and in the end. And it's a story of his family and both some of the decisions he makes in his determination to be a significant man and some of the misfortune that overtakes him. And then as the story goes on, you're also realizing things are changing for this particular tribe as colonialism and Christianity is becoming a part of their lives. So in terms of a few things about the book, so it's published in 1958. I believe that Nigeria would have gotten independence from England in 1960, if I recall. So it was published at a very significant time in terms of change in that society. Achebe, when he talks about this book, he points out that prior to this, all the voices writing about Africa were European voices. And he felt like there was a gap in how the stories were being told. He describes it as a book missing from the bookshelf, just that kind of visual image of something's not here. What's fascinating, though, is that this is fiction. It doesn't read like fiction. I felt like I was reading a story that might have been from his family or something. It's so vivid. It's so well crafted. It's so entirely credible and believable. I have to remind myself, this is a fictionalized version of, I guess, what was happening. As things were changing. It's a widely regarded novel. In some senses, it was the first of many novels that have come out of the African continent where Africans are describing their own experience, whether in fiction or whether in just telling true stories. It's been translated into at least 50 languages. So the setting is this village in what we call Nigeria. Again, that's a part of the controversy because Africa was not organized that way before colonialism. At the end of the 19th century, and as I say, it's just this turning point where Christianity is coming in, things are changing, and you watch the struggle of this man and his family. He is very much bought into his traditions. He despises his father, who was a weak effeminate man and had not achieved anything. He was a renowned wrestler in his youth. And now he has a family. He has 3 wives. He has a number of children. And he is trying to rise in prominence in his clan. But the traditions that shape him are also destroying him at the same time. He's struggling underneath them. And then he goes through the misfortune of killing a young boy by mistake and being banished from his tribe for 7 years. And he goes to live with his uncle in another village, Mbanta, and his uncle is Uchendu. And Uchendu plays a really important role at that point in his life in just kind of getting him out of his funk. He's depressed. He feels like his life has ended.
Why is Okonkwo here with us today? This is not his clan. We are only his mother's kinsmen. He does not belong here. He is an exile, condemned for 7 years to live in a strange land. And so he is bowed with grief.
But then you start to have the interaction between the Christian missionaries and his son, who he's never really regarded, and prefers one of his daughters over that son because he feels like she has the character he would have wanted in a son. His son becomes a Christian, and this becomes a source of conflict. Eventually, the story leads back to his home village of Umofia. I'm trying to get the pronunciations right, but of course, this is hard. It's weird. When you read a book, you don't need to pronounce properly in your head. You're just kind of like, oh, okay, it's that place, it's that place. All of this is unfamiliar. And eventually it leads to a confrontation between him and the colonial powers and his death. One thing I'll say about this in terms of how it struck me, it was so vivid. Just his description of life, of the land, of planting, of food. It really transported me to that place, and I was like, wow. His descriptions of rain sometimes were just like, oh my goodness, just so evocative. And I love the fact that he brought me to that place in the way he wrote it. But how did it strike you guys?
I'm going to join you in the sense that I did love the descriptions of food. I'm the kind of person that really loves watching like MasterChef and any kind of cooking show. So the descriptions of like their food is so incredible. But food aside, so I loved this book for its vividness, as you say, but I struggled in the sense that with Okonkwo, I don't think he's a very likable protagonist. I mean, he is kind of the tragic hero, isn't he? But he's not that likable. Physical strength is obviously very important. He's a really complex character because you see how he's desperately trying to be the opposite of what his father was, whom I actually kind of have a soft spot for because his dad might not have been a great provider for his family, but he did seem to have this kind of like softness and humor to him, which I appreciated. Whereas Okonkwo is just very harsh and dictatorial with his family. He doesn't show love. He doesn't show affection because he doesn't want to be seen like his father. And so it's really kind of heartbreaking seeing how he's raising his children. One of the worst points, I think, is when he has a boy who's been kind of given to him as like a tribute, like reparations from another village, Ikembe Funa. And they decide, the village, that he has to be killed a couple of years after having stayed with Okonkwo. And Ikembe Funa looks to Okonkwo as a father. He has like been his father figure, but Okonkwo then, not wanting to look weak in front of the tribe, when this boy runs to him for help, kills him. That was just an absolutely brutal moment. So again, I really struggled with Okonkwo as your main character, even though I had empathy for him because he's a guy trapped in these traditions and a way of life and harshness and just brute strength that is needed. And he's wanting to provide for his family, but it's just kind of killing him in the way that he's relating to everybody and is full of anger and fear. And that eventually that's what kind of does him in. So yeah, it was really, really fascinating book. How about you, Mark?
I'd read it years ago and remember from that time thinking this was a very powerful novel, but I don't think I really fully grasped it. But it was only reading it again in the last month that all kinds of things sort of hit me between the eyeballs. On my copy, of the book, there's a quote from Mandela who said this of Achebe. He said, "The writer in whose company the prison walls fell down."
Wow.
And I think, obviously, we're not in prison or in Robben Island or anything, but I think that's picking up precisely on what you've both mentioned, which is the vividness of it. You really are fully immersed in this. This was Achebe's first novel, but I think you mentioned, Joel, the whole reaction to Europeans, particularly commenting and describing African life and culture and being pretty patronizing, generalized, full of stereotypes and just misreadings. And he's presenting in this novel something that is clearly sophisticated, complicated, painful, confusing, with or without Western influence. So even before, I mean, you mentioned that the colonialism and Christianity don't come in till 2/3 of the way through, actually, but the things are beginning to fall apart even before then. So Okonkwo is a doomed figure even before outsiders pitch up, but they kind of accelerate things, I guess. And so to that extent, he really is this archetypal Greek tragic figure. And of course, the whole point in Greek tragedy is the hero has one particular fatal flaw that causes his downfall. And you have that in Okonkwo in spades. I mean, it's just very, very rich and deep. And yet Achebe describes it with just such very direct, not very flowery language, but it's not simplistic at all. It's very precise and concise. It's just astonishing in its economy, but you really do get the sense of, well, both Okonkwo's bewilderment at his circumstances when he's desperately trying to do the right thing to be the big man, but also his friends. I think this is the other thing that really struck me, is that actually around him, he's got some really good people, but for whatever reason, he can't quite go with what they're advising him.
Yeah, I love that with his best friend, Obiaraka. He's really interesting because he doesn't join them on that trip when they kill the boy. And Okonkwo is like, "Why didn't you come?" He's quite harsh with his friend. But his friend is not afraid to quite push back and say, "I had something better to do." And to basically tell, I just love it. He's like, "I had something better to do." And to basically push back at Okonkwo, who kind of accuses him of being cowardly. And he was like, "No, I wasn't cowardly. And you could ask anybody. I'm not a coward, but I didn't think it was right. I wasn't for this, and you shouldn't have done it either." And I thought that was really interesting. And it says that the argument would have continued, I think, had it not been for the interruption of food. It's either food or more people arrive, but they're really arguing. And I love somebody who's willing to push back at Okonkwo, who has kind of some kind of different perspective and a bit of wisdom on it.
Yeah, I think one of the things in reflecting on the novel as a whole is I think Achebe did a good job of painting a world that is imperfect, conflicted, yet beautiful in some ways. And it felt like I think he was able to get enough emotional distance from some of the most conflicting aspects of all of this and just tell it in a way that says, okay, I'm just giving it to you so that you can see it, so that you can think about it, so that you can experience it. And I appreciated that. He didn't feel like he was making comments on either his culture as it was or colonialism in terms of, okay, here's what's really good, here's what's really bad. He was just, it was this unvarnished presentation of what this was.
I really enjoyed that as well. He wasn't being didactic at all. He was just presenting as it was. And it's really interesting to know a bit of the background of Achebe, that, he was raised under Christian missionary circumstances, but his parts of his family, like his uncle, was still very much involved in village life. So he got that unique perspective of both. So he's in this really amazing place to be able to describe kind of both of them from a place of understanding. So yeah, I thought it was brilliant.
I mean, that there is something more edgy with the district commissioner at the very end. And
absolutely,
the DC represents what he is recording against, because of course he's doing his colonial job or whatever, but he's also keeping notes for his future book, which is going to be called The Pacification of Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger. And it's excruciating because it's so obvious that, one, they're not primitive. They're very sophisticated and complex. And he is just glossing over all kinds of nuance and stuff. And two, to call it pacification, whereas actually the demise of Okonkwo and his whole family and stuff, it's not caused by colonialism. So he, in a sense, the DC, he's called Gregory Irwin, I think, he can't take credit, as it were, for Okonkwo's demise. It's got nothing to do with him. It's the tragic flaw in Okonkwo's life that is just playing out. And the colonialists just sort of pitch up, for the last act, as it were, and that's that.
Yeah, it's so tragic as the reader when you've followed Okonkwo's journey and then to realise that he's just kind of a little footnote, a paragraph in this this district commissioner's notes. He's just like, oh, fascinating death. Oh, look at that. And you're like, no, you don't know. You haven't.
He might actually make it into the main text.
Yeah, yes. But it's tragic when you followed him and you've understood his difficulties and what's happened.
And even that treatment of the district commander felt so fair-minded. You felt the tragedy of it, but you just felt like, okay, yeah, but that makes sense. That I can see somebody taking that perspective. I've come here to keep order. This was about to get out of hand. Oh, okay, it's now settled. Oh, this is just another notch on my belt as I've come here to civilize the savages, kind of thing. But yeah, it was just a small window on a part of the tragedy of colonialism. The way one culture was imposed on another. And then the contrast between the two missionaries, I think was so well done in terms of just their approach to just becoming a part of the culture. And I think it was Mr. Brown who was more respectful of the customs and more non-confrontational, and where even some of his converts were just, he kept them in line and helped them to understand what was appropriate, versus Reverend Smith, who was just like, okay, no, this is how it's going to go, kind of thing. And I think even that was a helpful picture and shows a sensitivity to say, okay, not everyone in this context was the same. And so there's nuancing in his depiction of the Igbo culture, and there's nuancing in his depiction of even the colonial characters who are part of this drama.
That's what I kind of liked, with the fact that with Achebe's nuance and descriptions, in the end, it comes down to not groups, but just people. And you understand it's not about people in their different groups, it's just people, and people react and behave in very different ways, and that's the human condition.
We come finally now to discussing the convergence of these three things: Eternal Sunshine, Ghosteen, Things Fall Apart. And as I think Sophie mentioned in the previous episode, we haven't planned this. So let's just see what happens. Does anybody want to start? No. Right.
Really
well, it's been lovely having you. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you next week.
No, I mean, okay, I'll start somewhere that's probably more obvious. There's a fascinating collision right at the end of Ghosteen. In Hollywood, that last track is just one of his longer tracks there. But he gets to a point where he tells the story of Kisa, this woman whose baby has died. It says Kisa had a baby, but the baby died. Goes to the villagers, says, my baby is sick. Villagers shake their heads and say to her, better bury your baby in the forest quick. And as the story goes on, she goes to the mountain and asks the Buddha. And what the Buddha says is, go to each house and collect a mustard seed, but only from a house where no one's died. And as the story goes on, now she realizes, but every house she goes to, someone has died. And he says, as he goes on, he says, everybody's losing someone. Everybody's losing someone. The way it collides with this passage in Things Fall Apart, where Okonkwo's uncle is now helping him to reckon with just his own loss, and just the fact that he's now with his mother's relatives, just talking about loss. And in the end, he talks about this song. He says, have you not heard the song they sing when a woman dies? For whom is it well? For whom is it well? There's no one for whom it is well. And just that picture of that loss is a common experience for us as human beings, captured by Nick Cave in this lyric, and captured here again, just in this village scene where, hey, why are you so despondent? You're gonna get to go back to your home in 7 years. There's nobody who hasn't lost something around here. I just thought that collision was fascinating. And even the sense of all of these people in Eternal Sunshine rushing towards this service because they've all lost something and they're struggling to live with that loss. So I think that universality of loss and how we deal with it, how we respond to it, you see Nick Cave processing that in his own way and finding hope. You see Okonkwo being advised to have a better perspective on his own losses because everyone experiences that. And then you see in Eternal Sunshine, us Westerners who are more fragile, trying to erase that from our lives. So I thought, amazing. Look at that.
Isn't that? It was uncanny having read the book and then listened to the words more closely again for Ghosteen. It was like, whoa, you almost think this was planned, but it wasn't. Not by us anyway. It's not just the fact of loss, though, is it? It's also the maturity that comes with finding a way to incorporate that in just to the daily reality of life in this broken world. And if you can never get to that point, you're never going to be mature.
Yeah, I love when Uchendu says to Okonkwo, you think you're the greatest sufferer in the world? Mm-hmm. It's just such an amazing moment. And then he goes on to list how he's lost, personally, I think it's like 22 children he's buried. He's lost various wives. His daughter has lost babies. And he's just pointing out that this is a fact of life. Loss is part of it. And I love the kind of the pointing to the maternal again, which is both in Ghosteen and Things Fall Apart, because that's when Uchendu's kind of saying that you are in your mother's tribe at this moment because mothers are for protection and for safety. You are doing your mother a disservice by not allowing yourself to be comforted by her people.
That's a beautiful,
which I love. Yeah, and it's kind of it's very similar with Ghosteen and how he sits with his wife in the song "Waiting for You." It's very much about maternal grief, and he's seeing his wife suffer, and he's kind of waiting for her to return to him. But he knows that she has to go through this, and he says sometimes it's better not to say anything at all. And I thought both Nick's way of doing that and also Uchendu is kind of, they're doing something which as Westerners we're not good at doing. We're very good at kind of putting a little spiritual band-aid plaster on things. It's like a form of spiritual bypassing where we just want to say, oh, it's for the best or whatever. But they're kind of understanding that sometimes grief is so deep you don't need to say anything. And sometimes you need to point to the commonality of grief and that, like, yes, we're all going through this.
Just picking up the mother thing, I'm not sure I completely understood what it was there for, but in Eternal Sunshine, that bit where Clem and Joel are in the bath as little children.
Oh, yes.
Yes. What's all that about? But the mum is definitely there giving them bath time.
Well, that's when you're entering Joel's memories and you're seeing him as a child, like desperate for his mother's attention, because that's the thing that's going to comfort him in that moment. And he feels like she's not paying him attention. So yeah, another.
But Clem's in the bath with him, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think that's because he's trying to keep her in his memories, so she ends up in that scene with him.
Oh, good.
Yes, it should be pointed out. Yeah, it's
I didn't believe that literally happened though.
Yeah, it was well shot. It was just this bizarre picture. You're like, okay, wow. It's like,
and again, because of Michel Gondry's commitment to not using CGI, he made them film over and over again in this oversized kind of bathtub, and Kate Winslet ended up fainting.
I wonder if it's worth discussing masculinity and femininity, because that's obviously a key issue in the book, and Okonkwo has a very particular understanding of masculinity and his terror of somehow not living up to it because of his dad and what have you. And that leads to some pretty toxic relationships with the women in his life. And we are meant to deeply empathize with his wives and the agony that they face as well as the children. But I wonder
they have a rough journey with him as a husband.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wonder if you spotted any correlations elsewhere with the whole issue of what it means to be a man or a woman.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, Okonkwo, he's suffering under just his impression of his father and the difference between their experiences. And you get the impression really early on that this has been a driving force in his life to not be his father. So even when he struggles early on in the planting of crops, it's almost a crisis because I need to be successful. I need to become rich. I need to become influential. But yeah, just his idea of masculinity is crushing everyone else in his life. And it's not just his wives, it's his son also, who cannot measure up and is despised all along, worse when he converts to Christianity. And there's the end of the relationship, essentially, where you are not my son. And I think if I recall, he would have killed him if relatives hadn't intervened when he found out. And you see, I mean, again, we're in an age where we talk a lot about toxic masculinity, and it's hard to think of masculinity in healthy ways. But you definitely see this way in which this idea he's laboring under is oppressive to him and everyone else in his life. And it drives him, it owns him. He's unable to in a sense, become a whole person, because he must play this role.
Patriarchy is bad for everybody, it would seem. It doesn't serve. I think it's a really interesting. Oh, were you going to say something, Mark?
No, I was just raising an eyebrow.
Challenge me about the patriarchy.
Carry on.
Would you want to challenge me about the patriarchy?
We were just going to let you go where you were going right there.
I mean, yeah. I'm going to continue in my moral high ground. I think, again, it's a really interesting kind of contrast in masculinity when you see Okonkwo. It's not serving him in the sense that he's trying not to be like his father, whereas actually his father, yes, feckless, and he's not providing for his family, so that is a bad example of masculinity. But you see a lightness in his heart and his humor and the way he relates to people. And then you see that with Nick Cave in like Ghosteen. I thought it was a big contrast that in Things Fall Apart, twins are not wanted. They're thrown into the forest. That's one of their traditions. And yet the song Night Raid with Nick Cave is all about the conception of his twin boys. And it's such a soft and tender song. And he talks a lot about his wife in it. And yeah, there's that kind of softness and that welcoming of these twins and these boys. And that's I thought it was a really welcome picture of masculinity as a caring, protective force rather than a harsh dictatorial one.
And even thinking about masculinity in Eternal Sunshine, Joel's character, you watch him struggling with his own personality, his strengths and his weaknesses. He's an artist, he's creative, he has trouble expressing his thoughts some of the time. And yeah, you watch his journey as he's in this relationship that's pulling things out of him that he doesn't necessarily, sometimes he's not ready to express himself. It's an interesting portrayal of a man, of a couple, of differences between them, and just how do we resolve those differences. Yet you see him reach a point of courage in the end where he's like, no, but I want this. I'm choosing this. I know because of our memories and the tapes we made when we decided to erase each other, how bad this can get. But let's do this. And I thought it was such a point of growth for him as a character to embrace just, all that comes with loving somebody else. And so again, it's just an interesting picture of a man who is struggling in some ways, but is embracing the struggle.
Yeah, he's kind of fighting for his love with Clementine, which I love. And also with Nick Cave as well, going back to one of his songs, Galleon. I mean, a galleon is a ship, like a warship, isn't it? And in that song, he's kind of is again talking about the fight to be there for his wife in this time of grief. And again, it's just like two examples of men wanting to fight for the woman in their life.
And I think that's that's what sets these two apart from Things Fall Apart, because the women clearly have agency and are their own people, whereas the women are only what they are in relation to Okonkwo, and it cannot be otherwise. The only possible one who isn't is his daughter, Zinma, and he wishes she was a boy.
Right.
But actually, it's very disturbing, because basically, and you know, the first wife, you don't even know her name.
Yeah.
No.
That they are very much under his thumb, and it's fascinating, isn't it, that you don't have that even when you have an album or double album written by Nick Cave and his sort of long-term collaborator Warren Ellis. You know, two men, and yet you do feel that she has a real presence there, which is actually quite an achievement. It's not him assuming that he knows what she's going through.
Right.
He is trying to give her space, but you really don't get that in this village. But you wonder whether or not actually, if you were married to Uchendu or Obierica, it might be a little different.
Yes.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because it means it's not saying, oh, well, this is what African village culture was, you know, rigidly patriarchal. Well, the patriarchs in this village are not of one piece. They do have differences. You can't just dismiss the whole thing as one culture. It's complicated.
Yeah, it's layered, it's nuanced. You see different people responding in different ways to the same culture, or pushing back, as you pointed out, Sophie, to aspects of it and saying, hey, I'm critiquing my own culture. I don't believe that's right. We shouldn't have done that, even though that's the expectation and the requirement. So yeah, it's interesting just to see the agency of the individual in the midst of circumstances which you feel could determine who they are. And some of them are like, no, that's not who I am. That's not what I'm gonna do.
It's been a rich, very intense trio of things. I wonder what your conclusions or take-home thoughts might be.
So I think for me, we put together three pieces without thinking that much about them, but all of them are immersive in their own ways. And it helps me to appreciate the power of art to bring you into a world and then take you on a journey that has you reflecting on very deep and significant themes. And so I have a lot of respect for these artists and just their ability to do that kind of world building and to beckon and invite those of us who are receiving their art into this experience where they have a lot to say and is really thought provoking. So I think, yeah, I'm leaving with, again, sometimes we are going so fast. We are at a point in our history where everything can be bite-sized. And so you can consume all of these little snippets of things. And it's like, whoa, no, I had to take the time to sit in each of these masterpieces. But it was time so well spent. And just that encouragement. Yeah, there are things that are going to beckon us to go slower that have a lot to offer.
Yeah, agreed with that. It does feel like in our culture, it is everything, everywhere, all of the time, or all at once. And
The kind of
these
phrase.
have forced me. Yes. These have forced me to sit with them. There's no rushing any of these. You have to sit with them, and they are fully immersive. And each of them, just so in different ways, powerfully is depicting the human condition. I love the interactions between the men and the women in them, the way that different people deal with grief. And again, the idea that you see all of these different characters all in the film, in the book, within the album, and they're all reacting in different ways. And again, it goes to show that it's not really about kind of separate groups. You know, it's not a us, them, it's just people. And the human condition, the way we react to different things, and certain pressure will break some people, and certain pressure will bring out further compassion and wisdom in others. And it's a curious thing.
I have to say that when I was thinking about this morning in preparation, I was expecting that we'd all end up in complete sort of puddles of tears and angst. So I think it's no small victory that we haven't done that. But certainly our heartstrings have been played on with abandon by all three. So it's been it's not an ordeal, but it's definitely been an experience. I think we can put it like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a wholesome one and helpful one, I think. So until next time, thanks very much for joining us. And it's goodbye from me.
Well, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
That was Triptych, hosted by me, Mark Minnell, with Joel Bain in Jamaica and Sophie Killingley in the UK, with tech and editorial expertise from Owen Feetham. Visit our website at triptychpod.com, that is triptychpod.com, for episode show notes, background information and various links. Please do get in touch with any questions, comments and even suggestions for future episodes. And if you've enjoyed this, please do share it around and rate us wherever you get your podcasts.